Good morning, students. Today we are going to look at a very important topic in education, the influence of heredity and environment on development. Educators usually call this as the nature-nurture debate. By this, they mean to question what the most important factor that influences development. Is it something inborn, or is it the condition in the environment? This is an important aspect in education that needs to be answered by every educator. So let us begin by looking at what is heredity. Heredity is the passing of traits to offspring from its parents or ancestor. The study of heredity in biology is called genetics. In humans, eye color is an example of an inherited characteristic. An individual might inherit the brown eye trait from one of the parents. Inherited traits are controlled by genes, and the complete set of genes within an organism genome is called its genotype. The dictionary definition of hereditary is passing on of characters or traits from parents to offspring as a result of the transmission of genes. The characteristics of an individual that are considered to have been passed on by parents or ancestor. Now let us look at what we mean by environment. The social environment refers to the immediate physical and social setting in which people live or in which something happens or develops. It includes the culture that the individual was educated or lives in and the people with whom they interact. The interaction may be in person or through communication media, even anonymous or one way, and may not imply the equality of social status. Therefore, the social environment is a broader concept than that of social class or social circle. People with the same social environment often develop a sense of social solidarity. They often tend to trust and help one another and to congregate in social groups. They will often think in similar styles and patterns even when their conclusions differ. Now let us go to influence of heredity, family and twin studies. Twin studies are a vastly important tool in dissecting the nature versus nurture argument. Students, can you guess why is that so? Identical twins or monozygotic twins or siblings whose genotypes are duplicates of each other. They are the best indicator of whether biology affects traits in human beings. For example, if one twin has dark hair, then the other twin has dark hair as well. This concept of identical genes would distribute itself towards the phenotypes of behavior and personality of identical twins, fraternal twins or dizygotic twins share exactly half their genes with each other. they are not as optimal as identical twins for deciphering the degrees of genetic influence, but they are a very good basis for comparison for identical twins. Twin studies usually rely on samples of identical and fraternal twins. If biology has a greater hand than environment, then identical twins should behave or possess psychopathology similar to each other more so than fraternal twins. One particular study sought to determine the hereditability of attitudes among twins as well as the genetic variables such as intelligence that could affect attitudes among pairs of twins. A questionnaire was provided to the participants in which they were asked to rate their personality traits, physical abilities, and physical attractiveness. They were also asked to note their academic achievements. The results of the study showed that differences between the attitudes of the participants were at least partially correlated to genetic factors. This study leads to further questions about non-shared environments. Why is it that different environments have so much effect on twins' behavior and personalities? And why are some attitudes apparently rooted in genetics while others are not? As previously stated, it is clear that much more research must be conducted on twins before any solid answer can be found. A very significant portion of studying heredity and environmental effects on human traits and psychopathology is devoted to adoption studies. Adoption studies are important because they include two sets of factors that may account for differences in behavior and personality. Now, let us move on to biological parents and environmental parents. Any link between biological parents and the child that is given away is usually explained by genetics, and any links between the adoptive or environmental parents to the adopted child is usually attributed to environment. It is difficult to tell whether babies are shy because their mothers are shy and thus do not take them out very much, or because the shy mothers pass down their shyness traits. Measures of this study attempted to clarify the relationship between the infants and adoptive biological parents' shyness, parental sociability, and parental introversion and extraversion. Results showed that in non-adoptive families, the parents who reported high rates of shyness, low rates of sociability, and high rates of introversion also had shy infants. This indicates that a combination of home environment and genetics must come into play. One significant conclusion was made in this study that was based on the fact that biological mothers rated high on shyness and their adopted away babies were also shy. This strengthens the possibility of a genetic link overshadowing family environment, but of course, further research must be done. Students, now let us move on to the study of heritability of intelligence, an important topic for educators as we are concerned with the development of intelligence in our students. First, we will look at what is heritability. Heritability is a mathematical estimate that indicates how much of a trait's variation in a population can be attributed to genes. Estimates of the heritability of intelligence vary depending on the methods used. Most researchers believe that heritability of intelligence is between 60% and 80%. Even if heritability of IQ is high, heredity does not necessarily account for differences between groups. Three important factors limit heritability estimates. Heritability estimates do not reveal anything about the extent to which genes influence a high person's traits. Heritability depends on how similar the environment is for a group of people. Even with high heritability, a trait can still be influenced by environment. Evidence for environmental influences on intelligence comes from the following observations. Adoption studies demonstrate that adopted children show some similarity in IQ to their adoptive parents. Adoption studies also show that the siblings reared together are more similar in IQ than siblings reared apart. This is true even when identical twins reared together or compared to identical twins reared apart. Biologically unrelated children raised together in the same home have some similarity in IQ. IQ declines over time in children raised in deprived environments such as understaffed orphanages or circumstances of poverty and isolation. Conversely, IQ improves in children who leave deprived environments and enter enriched environments. People's performance on IQ tests has improved over time in industrialized countries. This strange phenomenon, which is known as Flynn effect, which we'll study in the next section, is attributed to environmental influences. It cannot be due to heredity because the world's gene pool could not have changed in the 70 years or so since IQ testing began. For decades, scientists have fiercely debated how much of the variation in individual intelligence can be attributed to genes. Studies of identical twins have suggested that 60 to 80% of intelligence comes down to genes, but the controversy in the past has been, well, maybe there is just no separating out nature and nurture, said study co-author Peter Wescher, a quantitative geneticist at the Queensland Institute of Medical Research in Australia. Heritability estimates of general intelligence in adulthood generally ranges from 75 to 85%, with all heritability due to additive genetic influences, while genetic dominance and shared environmental factors are absent or too small to be detected. These estimates are derived from studies based on classical twin design and are based on the assumption of random mating. Shall we see what is Flynn effect? Flynn effect. Students, a phenomenon mentioned where it was observed that people with high IQ has increased in developed countries over the years. This is called the Flynn effect, and we will look into this effect in this section. The Flynn effect is the substantial and long sustained increase in intelligence test score measured in many parts of the world from roughly 1930 to the present date. It is quite interesting to note that test score increase have been continuous and approximately linear from the earliest years of testing to the present. This effect of an apparent increase in IQ has also been observed in various other parts of the world, though the rates of increase vary. The Flynn effect is named for James R. Flynn, who did much to document it and promote awareness of its implication. Researchers think that it may be due to environmental factors such as awareness of proper nutritious food among parents, enhancing of skills through television and video games, improved schools, nuclear family, higher level of parental education, or improvements in parenting. Students, let us try to answer the question, what has caused IQ scores to increase from one generation to another? The ultimate cause can be said to be the Industrial Revolution. It affects our society in many ways. The other causes are things like smaller family size. If you have a better ratio of adults to children in the home, then adult vocabulary predominates rather than the child vocabulary. Family size fell in the last century throughout the Western world. Formal schooling is important. It helps you think in the way that IQ testers like. In 1900 in America, the children responded for a question, what dogs and rabbits have in common? They said, well, you use the dogs to hunt rabbits. This is not the answer that the IQ tests want. They want you to classify. Today, a child would be likely to say, they are both animals. They picked up the habit of classification and use the vocabulary of science. Students, can we say from the Flynn effect that we are more intelligent than our ancestors? That is quite a dramatic statement to make. I prefer to say our brains are more modern and more adapted to the IQ test and to today's way of life. Shall we see cultural and ethnical differences? Yes, cultural and ethnical differences. Studies have shown a discrepancy in average IQ scores between whites and minority groups in the United States. Black, Native American and Hispanic people score lower on average than white people on standard IQ tests. Controversy exists about whether this difference is due to heredity or environment. A few experts support hereditary explanations for cultural and ethnic differences in IQ. In the late 1960s, researcher Arthur Jensen created a storm of controversy by proposing that ethnic differences in intelligence are due to heredity. He based his argument on his own estimate about 80% heritability for intelligence. In the 1990s, researchers Richard Herrnstein and Charles Murray created a similar controversy with their book, The Bell Curve. They also suggested that intelligence is largely inherited and that hereditary at least partly contributes to ethnic and cultural differences. Many researchers believe that environmental factors primarily cause cultural and ethnical differences. They argue that because of a history of discrimination, minority groups comprise a disproportionately large part of the lower social classes and therefore cultural and ethnic differences in intelligence are really differences among social classes. People in lower social classes have a relatively deprived environment. Children may have fewer learning resources, less privacy for study, less parental assistance, poor role models, lower quality schools, less motivation to excel intellectually. Some researchers argue that IQ tests are biased against minority groups and thus cause the apparent culture and ethnical differences. However, not all minority groups score lower than whites on IQ tests. Asian Americans achieve a slightly higher IQ score on average than whites and they also show better school performance. Researchers suggest that this difference is due to Asian American cultural values that encourage educational development. Other aspects of intelligence and heredity. Emotional intelligence came to the public's attention in 1990. Expressing our emotions has an effect in all aspects of our lives. Thus, our emotional intelligence is of utmost importance in each individual's life. Emotional intelligence means our capacity to deal with our feelings wisely, as well as the ability to reason out for our vital well-being. It deals with our self-concepts to social skills, creativity, and our ability to understand our emotions as well as others. Students, do you think emotional intelligence is important? Probably not. We used to think about intelligence as reasoning and logic. We tend to ignore our emotions. However, intelligence and emotions are interrelated. For example, people who are unable to understand their own emotions could get into situations where they may not know how to handle their feelings, whereas people who have a good balance of IQ and EQ are often more successful in their life. EQ is not about tactics or diplomacy. It deals with how we learn, acknowledge, and express our feelings, but also how effectively we respond to others when it comes to dealing with their emotions. Emotional intelligence is the ability to know one's inner world and be comfortable with it. It is a set of skills that not only leads to better academic and professional functioning, but also good social interactions and a healthy living, which leads to personal satisfaction. We can say that 50% of our weak EQ is inherited through our genes and other 50% is obtained from our interaction with the environment. There is a difference between IQ and EQ. IQ can be defined as individual competence to perform in his or her academic work, where EQ indicates an individual's ability to get along with other people and handle social situations. Thus, both are of equal importance. Heredity and environmental factors both play an important role in the development of EQ. Some children are more emotionally gifted from infancy as they are able to understand others' emotions as well as their rather easily. Parents and teachers play the most essential role in developing a child's EQ. They need to provide opportunities where a child can express and deal with his or her emotions. They should be willing to listen to them, have realistic expectations, and not compare them to other children. Parents and educators should not only encourage the child's abilities and interactions, but also their sensitivity. They should model social behaviors appropriately. One approach taken for working on increasing EQ is to increase emotional competency, which can be broken down further into specific competencies. Some of these competencies can be self-awareness. Self-awareness, knowing one's internal states, impulses, and resources. Emotional awareness. Emotional awareness, recognizing one's emotions and their effects. Accurate self-assessment, knowing one's strengths and limits. Self-confidence, one's sense of self-worth and capabilities. Empathy, awareness of others' feelings, needs and concerns. Now let us conclude. Conclusion. Researchers generally agree that heredity and environment have an interactive influence on intelligence. Many researchers believe that there is a reaction range to IQ which refers to the limits placed on IQ by heredity. Heredity places an upper and lower limit on the IQ that can be attained by a given person. The environment determines where within these limits the person's IQ will lie. Despite the prevailing view that both heredity and environment influence intelligence, researchers still have different opinions about how much each contributes and how they interact. It is clear from the brief summaries provided on twin, adoption, and family studies that there is no black and white answer to the age old question of what contributes to human behavior, personality, and psychopathology. In reviewing a multitude of twin, adoption, and family studies branching a larger variety of topics, it is clear to see that the foundation for each human being is diverse in structure. For some cases, genetics seem to dominate. In some other cases, environment explains all. In still more situations, it is a strong combination of two factors that mold people to be who they are. There is a strong indicator that there will never be a clear response to the question, and that personality, intelligence, and development may always have to be rationalized on a case by case basis. So, we can conclude by saying that the nature nurture debate in education is a very important one that still needs further attention and research from educators. Educators should also note the debates regarding what constitutes intelligence. The answer to this important question keeps changing with the challenging times. In earlier days, logic was called intelligence and people were measured using intelligent quotient. A few years earlier, we had emotional quotient and developments associated with it. Today, we have multiple intelligence theory, which even speaks about the spiritual quotient and awareness of the person. So, nature nurture debate will keep changing along with the changing definitions of intelligence also. Thank you.